Our excursion was one that took us to places in Istanbul rather than into places in Istanbul, because we thought that gave us a better option to see more of the city. This was one of 3 palaces built by this particular Ottoman Sultan, and it was built in the 19th century, so you can see very much sort of a French Versailles style architecture is coming into play. I think it was his mother who had this mosque and clock tower built alongside the palace. Very impressive, but it was already getting very warm, so a quick hurry back to the bus, and we crossed the Bosphorus on the European side where people basically work, and crossed to the Asian side, which apparently is the more prosperous and where you go to be a bit on the plus side. Our stop was at a public park. There are a lot of parks in Turkey and they're all beautifully kept, and this one was on the side of a hill. The higher you went, the better the views were out over Istanbul. This sign I thought might give us an idea of where we were. In fact, it says Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality Social Facilities. In other words, if you go through this arch, there's a cafe and some public toilets.
Right to the left side, we could see Sea of Marmara, end of the boat, the corner where we call the Constantinople. Yeah.
The higher you went, as I say, the further you could see. We could certainly see Discovery over across the other side of the Bosphorus, which is a really wide stretch of water, which is not really obvious from this heavily zoomed photograph. This one can perhaps give you a better idea of just how big it is. It's very busy too. And then we crossed back again, and here's a video of going over the bridge to give even a better idea. The final stop of the tour was at a park, beautiful park, between the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosques. The Hagia Sophia does not mean Saint Sophia, as you might well imagine. In fact, Hagia means holy and Sophia means wisdom. So it was the church or the mosque of the Holy Wisdom. As I say, the park is absolutely beautiful between the two sites. That's the Hagia Sophia again, and this is the Blue Mosque, the first mosque ever built with 6 minarets. And right in the middle of the park is a really, really nice dancing fountain. We then returned to the ship and headed for the coffee port for a very welcome drink. And here's our regular companion, the yellow llama or alpaca. The waterfront in Istanbul around the cruise terminal is very much like those you'll find in a lot of other places in the Med. We know that Thessaloniki is almost identical. It's basically restaurants. And then there was this strange sculpture, something we didn't actually see. We didn't go down to the dockside itself, but it appears to be a timeline because it shows both Constantinople and Istanbul in it. And here's our towel animal, a peacock this time. The room was always beautifully kept and the curtains drawn to keep the room a little bit cooler during the day. Bozcaada and the abortive trip to Gallipoli. Let me set the scene for you. Bozcaada is a tender port, and as we waited to get off, an officer jumped onto the tender boat and told us the Turkish authorities had just decided that we all needed immigration cards, so they had to sort those out before we could actually move from the ship. That took about 10 minutes. We then crossed to the island itself, went through the immigration facility, turned left again, and got onto a ferry and waited because there were other tenders coming across with more people for our trip, plus people going to Troy. So we waited there and we left once they got on board. We went up onto this. It was obviously there were no vehicles actually travelled with us on that trip, so we were all upstairs in that passenger lounge. It's about an hour to Çanakkale, to the next ferry, and as we drove down to the port, we saw a couple of guns which had been used in the nearby forts to defend the Dardanelles up to the First World War. As we sat on the ferry waiting for a convoy of commercial vessels to go through, there was a terrific thunderstorm over the Cape Helles Peninsula, you can see in the background, with the weirdest cloud formations I've ever seen. I don't know whether it's a Turkish naval base or that was just visiting, but there was a naval submarine moored at Çanakkale. And as we, there's one of the forts that I mentioned earlier on. And then there is this carving in the hillside which translated means, "Wait, traveller, this land you came to and stepped on without knowing it is part of an era." Our guide was great, but we had another hour's drive to get down to Cape Helles. Here he is actually showing us a map of the area and the kind of thing that happened in the place, tried to show us the place we were going to go to. We were just running out of time continuously. This is an explanation of the Gallipoli campaign to give you a better idea than I can in the short time in this video, if you're interested. We eventually reached the Cape Helles Memorial, which sits high above the end of the cape. It's covered in memorial plaques inside the walls and outside the walls, as you will see in a moment. And as we walked in, there was this shield that was showing respect to the troops from Hawick.
I think what Joan was saying is actually correct. I think there are some rules that say that can be under the age of 16, so because the rules got the gimbal underneath.
All in all, we had around 20 minutes at Cape Helles Memorial, and then it was back on the bus and the move to our second stop. This was Lancashire Landing Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery, and it's typical of those that you find in areas that are prone to earthquakes. You don't get headstones because they will break, you get much shorter grave markers. By the time we were back on the bus, the guide was getting frantic phone calls from the ship to drop everything else and get us back as soon as he could, so we could sail away on time. The only thing he managed to show us was this road built by the British to bring men and equipment up from the beaches up to the top of the cliffs. So we missed lunch, had a very long drive, we'd had nothing to eat since breakfast. They did keep some of the restaurants open for us, and when we got into Islands, which was one of those we found this little bit of whimsy that the guy actually standing behind them had carved, "This is Jason and the Medusa." So all in all, a disappointing day, although Marella, bless him, did put their hands up after all the negative feedback and said they would give everybody their money back because obviously it hadn't delivered. And really the only highlight you could say of the day was this beautiful sunset, the kind of sunset you can only really get on a ship.